Welcome to episode 18 of Radio Omnicor. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, and you're listening to the show that is guaranteed to teach you something useful and introduce you to an interesting and dynamic guest. We have a full studio today. In his usual chair is Dr. Hilton Rudnick, Omnicor's MD, and our two guests joining us, Janko and Ian from Human Interest. Both are practising organisational psychologists with impressive degrees in the world of business and sports. Even if you're not really a rugby fan, such as myself, you have definitely heard of the All Blacks, one of the most successful sports franchises in history. Their win rate over the past 100 years is an astounding 75%. Today, we are exploring the All Blacks leadership model and what leaders can learn from this incredible success story. So welcome Janko and Ian and Hilton into the studio. It's fabulous to have you all here today. And I think we're going to start off with Janko just giving us a little bit of a brief intro to your background and your career and what has brought you to discovering the leadership lessons of the All Blacks.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. It's really an honor to be here to talk to you guys today and to share some of my experience and some of the lessons learned. I'm an industrial psychologist by profession, worked for big global consulting firms, Accenture, PwC, and then a couple of years ago we started a niche consulting firm, Human Interest, where we help and partner with clients and organizations to build high-performing cultures. I think the reason why I'm so interested in high performance is I come from a bit of a sporting background myself. I did represent South Africa in the 110-meter hurdles at youth, junior, and senior national level. And I think at that point in time already, from the age of 15 onwards, competing at that level, I realized that the way that you approach things, the way you make decisions, there's a big impact the mindset plays from a individual performance perspective, and that over the years just fueled the passion to really understand what does an elite mindset look like, and ultimately what does an elite team look like. And I think from our side, there are many great examples, and probably the greatest example of them all is the All Black rugby team.
Well, we're excited to hear more about that because it's fascinating how you can look for these lessons in the sports franchise. And Ian, how do you? I think you're very involved in the All Blacks in terms of your studies. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think just as a brief intro, again, thank you for having us. I think everything that Janko said, I'm on the same page. I think that's why it's him and I are partners in our relative fields. I've also been around the block a few times in terms of my experience. I don't quite have the sporting background that Janko has, but I certainly am inspired by sports because I think that it's often a pinnacle of human performance, which is, I think, ultimately one area that industrial psychologists look at is how do we get the best out of people. So from an organizational development perspective, I'm really passionate about how is it that we can create great organizations. And great organizations exist out there. We read about them, we see them, and we see what they do, and I think we try to emulate them in their successes. My agenda is really how do you create great organizations so that people can thrive and succeed and do amazing things. So like Janko said, I think the All Blacks are a really great example of a great organization. They're doing amazing things on the field of rugby. They bring people together, fans, they make fans happy, so they definitely deliver what they're supposed to as a business or as an organization. But also the players. I can't think of a better job in the world I can actually think of a better job of being an All Black. I think the next best job would be a professional surfer. But otherwise, I think from an organisation, the All Blacks have a great deal of fun, it seems, really excelling in what they do. And I think there's a lot we can learn from them. And I think to your point, my studies in them, doing a PhD where I'm trying to see what is the overlaps between what industrial psychology thinks about the performance of the All Blacks, and then also what does sports psychology say, and how can we learn from those two fields, specifically in the context of the All Blacks.
Fabulous. And Hilton, you want to give your intro?
Well, as always, happy to be here and great to be in such distinguished company. I don't think anyone would ever accuse me of being an elite sportsman. I do go for a little jog around the block every now and again, and I try my best, but I am fascinated with the lessons that we learn from sports teams, and I'm fascinated to get into the discussion.
Great. So, Janko, do you want to kick off with the key points, the lessons that have been outlined in a lot of the research and the books written on All Blacks?
I think you can almost summarize them, under 3 pillars, if I can say that, and we've done extensive research outside of the All Blacks as well, and I think that overlap really led to the development of what we call our elite team framework. And really there are certain fundamentals that has to be in place. We then look at certain team characteristics, and then obviously very importantly is leaders. If you look at the All Black rugby team, they believe that there's one captain but 15 leaders on the field. So from a key perspective, I'm just quickly going to run through them. We've identified 15 dimensions, and I think throughout our conversation we'll explore a bit more of them. From a fundamental perspective, irrespective of if you're a sports team, an executive committee or a management committee, clear and achievable goals. Why do we exist? Where do what do we need to strive and work towards? But also how are we going to do that? So that clear roles and responsibilities. Very big with the All Blacks is the sense of purpose. If we also look at the millennials now and people entering the workforce, they want to understand why does this organization exist outside of only the business itself. What do they do for society? So the clear sense of purpose, very much delivery focused. So yes, if we have this goal that we strive towards, we know what our tasks are, can we focus our effort and our energy to actually see things through to completion? And then critical is open communication. So that will all fall under the fundamental pillar. If we look at some of the team characteristics, important there, 5 dimensions that we've identified is a shared commitment, everyone working together towards the achievement of a common goal, really joint accountability, psychological safety, really that ability to trust, to try, and to be okay if someone fails, because that is what is expected. To value and leverage diversity, very important, and to be flexible. And then lastly, under the leadership pillar, 5 dimensions that we've identified from a leader perspective is really the notion of empowerment, recognition, not so much recognition of performance, but more so recognition of effort. And we can probably delve a bit into the work of Carol Dweck and the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. Really optimizing talent, or what we call talent optimization. So leveraging players according to their strengths. We also see that in business in terms of elite teams. The concept of continuous feedback, we've touched on open communication under fundamentals, but from a leadership perspective, really creating that environment where there's continuous feedback. And then lastly, and also where I open, is the whole concept of shared leadership. So if we look at these 3 pillars and the 15 dimensions, we looked at the All Blacks. They tick all the boxes. We did a few other studies as well. One of them looking at the Leicester City football team in the 2015-16 season, went from nowhere, from being 14th on the log to winning the Premier League. Again, similar characteristics displayed, and that's what we believe really underpins an elite team.
So Ian, some of these things they sound, very mainstream in organizations that we work in, the leadership programs you run, but some of them are kind of countercultural, like the idea of the rituals that they have, reading around that they take care of their own, they sweep their own floor. Do you want to tell us, I found that fascinating, a little bit about what that means and the humility that goes with it?
So I think, I think what Janko's unpacked there, the 15 sort of dimensions, or factors that really make up elite teams. One could say, well, isn't that true of any great team? And obviously that is the case. I think for me what's interesting is how they got there. And so what you're alluding to is how did they get to the point where they tick all these boxes? It didn't happen by mistake. It was very intentional. It was purposeful. It was done. There were interventions that were put in place, and so this starts to tick all the boxes of an OD practitioner or an industrial psychologist, because we can read about these things and never really understand how they got there. And I think that's why I'm so interested in the All Blacks, is because there's a lot of information out there where we can kind of go through the story of how they got to the point where they do tick these 15 boxes. That's the nice thing about a sports team. It's public, everybody can see what's going on, and a lot has been written about them. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. I mean, I hardly even watch rugby, to be honest. Although I love the sport, I don't get to watch it all the time. For me, what's really, really interesting, what I'm passionate about, is how they got there. So one of the key ways they got there was through culture interventions. So the things that you're talking about are things that they started doing, behavioral changes that they made, purposeful, intentional, planned, arranged, organized, carefully thought out, practices, rituals, sort of rules of engagement, whatever you want to call these things, that then changed the very fabric or the dynamic of the organization. I mean, let's not forget, it's not as if the All Blacks weren't a great rugby team to begin with.
Exactly.
They've always been probably the best rugby team in the world. They've done what is probably even harder for a great team, and that's to become better. They were already good and they became great. How did they do that? That's what fascinates me, and I think the things that you've touched on there it's cultural changes. It's about creating a true organization, which again is a group of people coming together to achieve common goals. They've done it well. They've done it in ways that are inspiring because it's genuine, it's authentic. At least that's what I think anybody who experiences watching the All Blacks will take away from that. There's a lot of companies will put these 15 pillars, dimensions up on a wall and try and they'll pay lip service to it or they'll even put interventions in place. But how many of them really succeed? Well, the All Blacks have, and I think that's the lesson that we can learn from them.
So thanks. I think that's a fascinating beginning. One thing in the leadership space that I'm interested in is the kind of role of ego. And I mean, I know that I certainly have a strong view, and I learn more and more every day how important culture is in an organization and the ramifications of culture. So the question is, how do you take a group of elite players who have had, I guess, the reinforcement their whole lives, how brilliant they are, they must have gone through school, winning, being captains of their teams and getting into this group of equally elite people. How do you rein in the individual ego so that they see themselves as part of a greater whole and not there for their own glory in some kind of way, as you often see in sports teams?
Absolutely, Hilton. And I think it's we also very often see it in organizations is what do you do with the star performer who is not, let's say, adhering to company values? So if we talk performance management 101, it's about they achieve the what, but the how they do it is detrimental to the organization. And I think in the case of the All Blacks, it's actually quite simple. You don't pick them. I mean, there's been numerous documented, I don't want to use the word case, but instances where a player stepped out of line, but because they have such a strong culture, the senior players, the leadership group, the shared leadership just called that person to task. And, so the culture really took care of that. I think to your point as well as, it's not something that happens overnight. And I think that's also something that we see quite often in organizations is they want to go through this culture transformation, but the company is 100 years old and they expect to change a 100-year-old culture in a year. That's completely unrealistic. What the All Blacks have built, as Ian has said, has come over a century. They've been great and they're just striving to become greater. They say that adaptation is not a reaction, it's an everyday action. So it's like, how do we keep moving forward? How do we keep improving? And that continuous purpose is what people aspire to be part of.
Well, Janko, I think they speak a little bit about what I read as the small, making small changes to improve in the team. But I have a question. Both you and Ian are involved in our current leadership program we're running. And one of our executives have sent through a question on the group, and it's different to what Hilton asked, because the question from Craig Salet is, what if someone is already in the team, you've picked them, and they're not espousing those values and the culture? How then does the All Blacks deal with that type of behavior?
Yeah, if I can answer, I think some of the stories that are told about how the All Blacks really changed the way they lead the team. So the story goes that after 2004, there was I guess in South African terms, I think an indaba is the right word, but everybody got together and said, look, folks, we need to make a few changes here. And Graham Henry, the coach at the time, said, if you expect me to lead these players, then we are going to fail as a team. leadership of this team has to be pushed down into to the team itself. And so they went on a very purposeful journey of sharing leadership. And there's a research article that actually talks about how the All Blacks are really good at showing that concept of collective leadership. So it wasn't a case of a selector. I mean, if there's any sports fans in the room, you'll know the stories. I mean, in South African sports, we hear them all the time. These things are played out in the media, but it's not a case of a selector having to justify the decision or a coach having to argue about the decision. If at the end of the day, the team decides that this player is not quite gelling with us at the moment, and it's not up to the captain necessarily either. It's a collective group. It's senior players are, and Janko spoke about empowerment as one of those factors, is that senior players are empowered to really show leadership. And, so the team decides, not just the coach. And I think that for me is an amazing reality with the All Black team. How many teams in the world can get that right, where they can actually manage themselves effectively without the need for a CEO or a coach or a person in charge to have to come in and make a final decision. And the team collectively makes those kinds of calls, and they're not easy calls, but that's why there's an even more reason for it to be collective. And I also just want to elaborate. I mean, how they got to this point, post 2004. Was system-wide. The organisation is not just the 15 players on the field. So, if you go onto the New Zealand Rugby Union website, the All Blacks, the stated purpose of the All Blacks is to unite and inspire the people of New Zealand. The New Zealand Rugby Union has a very clear policy on players leaving the country and playing for clubs overseas. In other words, the system has made it so that every player who plays for the All Blacks is playing for something that they know is bigger than them. So it's not just what these 15 players or 23 players and the coach and coaching staff does. It's how the system itself, management and the New Zealand Rugby Union. I mean, the All Blacks are a national treasure. So they're really treated like that as well. And I think there's lessons in that too. So what happens on the field is really the result of a whole lot of very, very clear organizational development work that's been done over a long period of time. But the last, I would say, 14 years has been the most interesting from an OD perspective, because there was a clear decision made to do a few very specific things. And I think and that's what's made them the most amazing sports team in the world at the moment, statistically.
I mean, I wonder from maybe both of your perspectives, how far you can stretch the metaphor of sports teams to corporate organizations. So you're talking about, like, if someone's out of line, you don't pick them. I'm not sure what the equivalent of that is in a corporate setting. Is it a tough conversation? Is it you're fired? Do you get sidelined? How does it work? And how applicable are these things where the All Blacks have to hold it together for kind of 2 hours on a big day, whereas on an organization you're on continuously. So I'm kind of interested in what you both think about how you apply the metaphors of elite sports teams in general and All Blacks to the corporate world.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question, Hilton. Obviously you can't apply sports in the business setting. It's not a like-for-like comparison or scenario. Indeed, if we just look at South Africa, you can't just walk into the room and say, look, you're right. And certainly that's not what the All Blacks do either anyway. I think at the end of the day, as to how far we can go, I think in principle we can agree on that there are very many things in sports, and in team sports in particular, that we can see the potential value in applying some of those principles in organizations. Where it becomes challenging is when you have things like labour legislation that makes it difficult to do certain things. But the principles are still sound, and I think the principles that we're interested in are less about technical things like laws, and more about the quest for optimum human performance. And what I find interesting is why organizations don't pay more attention to what sports teams and even individual sports. If you think of an executive who has all that stress and pressure to perform, how is that any different to an athlete who has to compete at the Olympics? And my perspective is, if you look at that individual, they are really holding a very clear torch on what is the potential of a human being when they really set their minds to doing something. The All Blacks, what can a team potentially achieve if they really set their minds to it and create the system that supports that? And again, I look at our rugby team, our national rugby team, and we're seeing glimpses of a coach and players that really want to create a great team. One has to then ask, is there an enabling environment? And again, that's OD 101. How do you, so a team and an organization can just do their own thing and try and become great, but there needs to be an enabling environment, there needs to be support, there need to be some sort of interventions, it needs to be strategic. And so that's going to be interesting to watch. So yeah, but going back to your question, I think let's try and put a number on it. 90% of it you can apply. Okay. At least.
Look, and I think, Ian, you mentioned the words enabling environment, and if you look at sports and you look at business, I think sport is a great example of where there is 100% alignment between individual strengths and the sporting discipline or the sporting code in which you compete. Now, why can't that exist in organizations? If you know that these are an individual's personal strengths, these are their personal aspirations, this is their potential to deal with complexity, for instance, and this is the organizational needs and this is the job demands. So you've got all the facets to create that marriage. But what we very often see in business is that misalignment. And it's either because there aren't any conversations around as personal aspirations. It is either because a person is being promoted into a manager role because of a technical expertise, irrespective of whether they have the desire to lead a team of people, not even saying that they've got the ability to lead a team of people. And I think another key thing is I want to say the ability to make a tough decision. You use the words tough conversations. Yes, the All Blacks do have them, but they've got the system that supports that. And it's not saying that, listen, as Ian has said, we need to operate within a certain environment, a certain framework. But what prevents organizations from crafting those elite teams? By having a conversation with someone saying, listen, there's misalignment between what you are currently producing, your aspirations, and what we are expecting of this job. It's not saying that we are going to get rid of you, but let's rather create a position or put you in a position that will set both you and the organization up for success.
I think that's a conversations that we see even in our coaching practice. These simple things, you don't need to do rocket science. Ian, on your point around the pressure that business people are under and the teams are under, the one idea of really embracing that expectation of your fans. You spoke about they make their fans happy. I really love that. Can you talk more about how do we embrace the expectations rather than resist and fear the high levels of pressure?
Sure. I listened to such an interesting podcast on my long flight home from Ireland the other day, and it's not quite the same topic, but it was around alpha male behavior in chimpanzee groups of chimpanzees. It was fascinating, I must say. But I think one of the interesting things that came out of it was that I took out of it was that in teams, or let's go back to the chimpanzees. In chimpanzee groups, the alpha male and the lowest members of the group have the same levels of stress levels. They measure this. They measure the blood works, and what they've discovered is that the moment somebody is responsible for leading a team, that person is under immense pressure and stress right from the get-go. Now, this is research that's shown that in the animal kingdom, that's how it works. You become the leader of a team or a pack or an alpha male or alpha female, and your stress levels go through the roof. Because you now have all this added responsibility. And I think if we look at businesses and organizations, that is true as well. I mean, I think leaders are under immense pressure consistently. They've got to be good at very many different competencies that perhaps they didn't even realize they needed before they became executives, etc. And it's not too different from, I think an elite athlete who has to continuously be thinking about how am I prepared for this role. And look, I must be honest, it's not just executives. I think the people that ultimately become executives already have these traits. They're thinking about their own development all the time. They spend the hours, not necessarily in the gym, but whether it be working out mentally, working on competencies, whether it be building relationships, building skills. They work on themselves. They become better at what they do, and then they get placed into these positions. But then the real work starts, because then they have to maintain that level. And I think I think we can definitely look at how, when I have to coach a person who's an executive, I immediately look beyond just how they're performing in the office space or in the boardroom or whatever. I look at how do they work on themselves outside that environment. How much training do they do to prepare themselves daily, weekly, monthly for the task at hand. And I can very quickly assess a person in a coaching scenario to say, well, I can tell you spend an awful lot of your private time playing PlayStation and Netflixing and watching Game of Thrones. You don't spend any time with your you know what I mean? You can pick up because those are the things that I think you need to be working on. And it shouldn't be work, obviously, but to make you elite at what you do. Healthy all round, well-being all round is gonna really help you perform. And I think that's sort of the analogy I use when I think of elite sports people. Is the folks that are going to succeed are the ones that are looking at the total their total selves and working on all aspects.
Look, and I think that's obviously a clear mantra of the All Blacks as well. Better people make better All Blacks. And I think what you refer to there is just that the whole concept of holistic development. I see it very often, working with individual athletes as well. When you start unpacking what is preventing them from achieving their goals, it is things outside of the actual sporting discipline. And I've seen on numerous occasions that once you address those elements, whether it be in the financial domain or in the spiritual domain, whatever the case might be, performance in the actual job, which is maybe their sporting discipline, will increase. And exactly the same in executive coaching that we do as well, is look at a person holistically. And I think that's my experience many times where there is a shortfall in organizations. We're only so focused on the competencies required for this job, but because we haven't had the conversation about the next two potential jobs, we can't start preparing that person now. And then you talk with your L&D executives and they say, no, we need to bring self-driven learning in. But as Ian has said, if we just install that mindset, equip managers to have holistic conversations. You shouldn't be a different person at home or around the braai than you are at the office. And that's what's so key in the All Blacks as well, is authenticity and holistic well-being, off and on the field.
It sounds like a lot of the things we're talking about are becoming increasingly well known in the industry. And we're talking about like the importance of EQ and getting on with each other and the cultural things. I'm interested in this collective leadership though, because how does the group hold each other accountable, or is there someone who is it the coach who takes charge and says, this is our vision, this is what we're all trying to do, and then everyone gets on board? Or is that a kind of collective decision making where they all weigh in and then decide together? I mean, how does it work in the real world with the actual All Blacks in coaching?
I think so. Let me start with what Ian already alluded to when they started with the conscious intentional actions back in 2004. Is they got it was the coach, it was some of the senior management, and very importantly some of the senior players that then got together, had that endowment and said, listen, so what does it mean to be an All Black? And we see that in organizations as well. Very often the culture of the organization is like a pendulum. It swings together with the leadership style of the organization. So yes, leaders does have a very important impact on the culture, and they intentionally started creating the desired culture by involving that senior leadership group, coach, as I say, part of the administration, and then the actual players. I think what they did then a bit further is we very often hear the term cascade in organizations. They effectively cascaded it to all the different franchises. If you look at the playing style of the Hurricanes, Crusaders, Highlanders, the Chiefs, You can pick up a open side flank from one team, put them in another team, and they will fit in, because that's the way that they play. If we compare that to South Africa, we are nowhere near that. Each franchise has got their own unique style, and then you've got a national coach that's got his style, trying to get that in. So I think we lack that collective, that collective playing style that the All Blacks has. And I think that, because they started that intentional, those purposeful actions, and all the relevant role players was involved, it created the concept of the shared leadership. Whether you are now playing at under 13 level, you already know what is the likely style and the likely culture that you will have when you progress through the under 16, under 18, under 20 All Black rank. Should that be the case? So because there's such a lot of similarity, I think it's a lot easier to have that shared leadership and that shared accountability than if you find yourself in these very subcultures, different different leadership styles, etc.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to pick up on that, the New Zealand Rugby Union, and indeed I think New Zealand as a country, made the decision that our primary goal is to create a great All Black team. And I think to your point, Janko, it was around alignment. Without that alignment of objectives, of goals, it was never going to be possible. And I think that's what they've done by, making some policy decisions. I think the reality is that everybody now who is involved in rugby in New Zealand is all working towards the pinnacle, which is an All Black rugby player. But that doesn't mean that they're better than anyone else or that they're the most important. It means that we all play a role in this. So, whether it be at school level already, to say that one day when I become an All Black, that's what it will mean, and that just goes to show how powerful this intervention, this change. I think every young boy in New Zealand wants to be an All Black. But now he's a lot clearer on what that means, I think, and that's what they've done so successfully. And then I think to your point around how collective leadership plays out within the team, again, there's a lot to play for. We are all in this together. And like I say, it's a cultural thing. They've created a community of players that there's not that there's no ego. Of course there's ego. But my needs are not more important than the needs of the team. So the more interesting question is, how do you get people to actually give up what they want for the cause? And look, that's happened throughout history. We've seen there's many examples. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it happens, I think we should pay attention. They've done this. They've gotten the players to think beyond just themselves, which I can't say for a lot of other sports disciplines. When you look at some of the challenges they have.
So, is this speaking to the idea of purpose beyond profit? And is this how people then how the team gets the buy-in? So one of our other executives, Sean Music, has asked the question, how does the leader communicate and get buy-in from the current team and future teams? It seems to be instilled in the system from when they're young.
Yeah, I think the short answer to the question there is, how does he communicate openly and honestly? I think that's their one of their kind of mantras is. Feedback is feedback. The only good feedback is open and honest feedback. So they've got little rituals that they've brought into their system. Where Janko, I think you can elaborate more on it. So open and honest feedback is absolutely critical. There's no need to sugarcoat. And look, that is where maybe sports is different. Is that we don't get to see every move that an executive makes in his or her day, whereas we see everything that the All Blacks do on the field. And certainly if they make any big boo-boos off the field, we hear about those too. So that is maybe the difference. But again, the question has to be is, how do you get people to the point where they are comfortable to give open and honest feedback and to receive it?
I think if I just can elaborate a bit on that, in terms of purpose, and Colleen, you said it doesn't matter how old you are, if you dream of becoming an All Black, you know exactly what it is. You know what the values are, you know what is expected on the field, off the field. And I think that is maybe something that many organizations grapple is, what is our identity? Our identity isn't necessarily our 5 values that's in posters across the organization. Because if I then ask the different executives, what does it mean to work here? I'll get different answers. Talks to your point, Ian, that you said, it's about alignment, which is something that they purposefully went about. And is it impossible to get that? Absolutely not. Will it take time and effort? Yes, it will. Will it be beneficial in the long run? Absolutely.
The All Black team is going to be great for many, many years. Obviously we hope to beat them, and we hope that they get worse. But the reality is that their system is going to perpetuate itself. So it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. I don't know. I think there's some camps of people that want to see the All Blacks lose. Personally, I don't see it, happening very soon, because they've created this self-perpetuating system. So we talk about grassroots development, or in organisations we talk about bottom-up. I mean, there's a great example of bottom-up. The system perpetuating itself.
So I don't know if it's accurate to say that more important to the All Blacks is how they play the game rather than did we win, right? I mean, is that fair? Or so I guess what I'm saying is they focus on the purpose and the meaning of being a team, and winning is for them a byproduct of playing the game well. While they just focused on, that's what I'm reading there, that the final score is less important.
Their focus definitely is not on the concept of winning. They know it will happen if they execute their processes. So that's where their focus is. And I think they've mastered the art of goal setting, and what they talk in the Navy SEALs, they talk about the concept of microsegmentation. So they know that if I do X, Y, and Z, I will win. Because if I drop an apple, it will fall to the ground. That's the law of gravity. That is what is going to happen. And they've got such faith in their systems, in their processes, and in each other, that they're not concerned about winning. Winning is going to happen. That's just a byproduct of perfect execution.
Right.
So if you look at that and what they believe as well, so that they know that practice does not make perfect. Okay, so if you're a parent out there listening, you tell your child practice makes perfect, stop lying to them. Practice makes permanent, perfect practice makes perfect. So they execute everything that they do perfectly. They execute their processes perfectly. And they know that a perfect process will lead to a perfect outcome. But the outcome's not in the control, the process is in the control. If you've recently listened to some of the post-match interviews of Novak Djokovic, who won Wimbledon 2018, Kevin Anderson, who played a couple of marathons, they use the word process so often. They said, listen, I just knew I need to stick to my process, trust in the process, and the result will take care of itself.
But then in business, is that lesson still the lesson we learn, that don't worry too much about what your competitors are doing. Don't always just focus on the outcome and the profits. Play the game well. Make sure that your internal processes are working well, that you're being the best you can be in terms of what you can deliver, and the other stuff will kind of follow as a byproduct.
So I think it's what are we focusing on? Are we focusing on leading or lagging indicators? And what do we see at 99 out of 100 organizations? Performance management, they focus on the lagging indicators. How much time and effort is spent talking about the leading indicators? So what do you need to do to hit those sales numbers? Have we considered that? Are those the things on your KPIs? Or is it just your eventual revenue that you generate?
But so sorry, I don't want to cut you short there, and I know you want to say something, but I mean, are the internal conversations in a way, or how do we hold each other accountable? How do we treat each other as people, so that if we get that right, we're moving our energy in the right direction, and that kind of becomes a leading indicator. Let's work together well. That's the key thing. I mean, is that real?
Yeah, look, I think it's difficult to say, precisely how the All Blacks have those internal conversations, because we are talking about a team that very well studied or being looked at, but we're talking about things that are happening. It's their IP, so to speak. Right. Some of the things that we know they do, they have that off-field captain for the day on game day, and this person's role is it's a senior player generally, who walks into the change rooms and gives people very specific feedback after the game around what happened, what went wrong, what could have been better. And again, that's just an example of a ritual or a tool that they use, that an outsider, an objective person, a person whose emotion's not in it, because I can imagine for a coach it must be quite difficult to walk in and give objective feedback if you've had a bad half or you've lost. So it's an objective person who can come in, who's trusted to be able to give the feedback, and also trust that when he gives the feedback, it will be received and it will be listened to. But then, of course, the coaching processes, I think this is to Janko's point, that then kick in thereafter. Let's not fool ourselves. In the modern day game, the level of analysis that these guys go to. So there is an element of let's look at how we did, but then the focus is on how do we improve. And the All Blacks have a mantra around when you're on, the best time to change the game is when you're on top of the game. I think the All Blacks are like any of the organisations in business that we've looked at over the last couple of years that have completely changed their respective games. And very few people can see them being toppled. The All Blacks are in that realm in the sports world. The rest of the world, as far as rugby is concerned, is trying to emulate or keep up with them. They're setting the agenda. They're the ones that are changing the way the game is played. And they will keep doing that while they're on top. It's how they stay on top. And winning is, let's also not fool ourselves. For an All Black, losing is not an option. But like Janko said, they're not focusing on the scoreboard. The thing I love about their style of play the most is even if they're 50-0 up, they will keep going. They do not stop until the last minute. And it's the same when they're losing. I don't know how many times as a fan, Springbok fan, we've lost the game in the last quarter of the game because the All Blacks just don't stop. So they will always have that in them to win. But their focus on how they get to that result has changed, and it's yielded results for them.
Hilton, just to elaborate on you said that how they talk to each other, absolutely critical to the All Black success. So one of the things that they are very, very aware of is their narrative. I think also an interesting fact is that for the last 15 odd years, the All Blacks has had a full-time mental coach. His name is Gilbert Inoka. He is on the field at the sideline of practices. He actively works with management, with the coaching staff, with the players. The players say that he is instrumental to their success. So they really understand that. I want to say you need to train your most important muscle, which is your mind. But coming back to the concept of narrative, the way that they give each other feedback and the way that they coach is through active questioning. So obviously there's a whole neuroscience behind it in the form of neural pathways, that it's more effective to get a person to do things differently by asking questions instead of telling them what they should have done. So the way that they give feedback is not say, hey, you should have done that, but what do you think you could have done differently? Let the person think about it so that when they're in the moment again, they don't have to try and rely on memory, but it is their own idea that they can then act out, which decreases the decision-making span, and that's why the All Blacks can adapt their style so quickly. They play what they see in front of them. They don't have to think, game plan B, what do we have to, we have to do this. It's like, let me play the situation in front of me. I'm empowered, there's psychological safety in the team, and I know that afterwards, if I made a mistake, they're going to ask me a question, and I will then have the ability and the opportunity to respond.
Janko, in the presentation that you both do, it's gone a bit viral in the industrial psychology forums and platforms. The one thing you do is play the haka, and it's always inspiring to watch. I know you mentioned always gives you goosebumps. What is it about that song and the way they do it that creates that energy?
So I think the haka is an example of a ritual. I was watching the Wimbledon final. Novak Djokovic, I don't know how many times he bounces that ball before he serves.
I counted 17 times once, together with a commentator. I'm like, can you stop doing that?
I wanted to see if it was an exact number. It turns out it isn't.
No, it isn't.
He feels he's ready. But,
yes.
So from maybe just to touch on some neuroscience on what those kinds of little rituals do, is they find that in tennis and a lot of sports people have these little rituals that they do that basically almost like resets their mind. So if you think about how that is a powerful tool to, let's forget what's just happened, let me just focus on what's in front of me. It's a comforting thing that you do. Now I think of the haka, that's on steroids. Because essentially what you're doing is, number one, you're sending a warning shot to your competitors to say, look, we're here now, and we're warriors, and you've got problems on your hands, because we're big and strong, and look at my muscles, and they do that dance, which is intimidating, and it's meant to be because it's borrowing from New Zealand, culture. The haka is a cultural thing that also then again inspires and unites the people, both on the field and off the field. So the fans go nuts. So now what you've done is you've done a little ritual that completely turns the stadium on its head. And so these it's not a little ritual, that's a huge ritual for them that I think, if you think about it, it will get the players in the zone, it gets the fans going ballistic, ready to watch their team do some damage on the field. It's intended to put the opposition players off a little, so it has that consequence as well. But then it also, I think the most powerful aspect of it is that it speaks to the nation, it speaks to the New Zealand people, and I think that's probably the most the biggest value of the haka. In fact, for me, is how it immediately gets everybody behind them.
It even seems to get the opposition fans excited.
Absolutely. Nobody hates seeing the haka. Well,
absolutely, and I think to Ian's point, where they changed things whilst they were ahead. They always had the haka. It was always hair raising, but back in 2007, they felt, but listen, we feel that we want to reinvent this a bit. So they developed a new haka. They pulled in Maori chiefs to help them. Said, listen, this is part of our new culture drive, part of where we want to take this team to remain number one in the world. Is we need something new, we need something fresh. This is the type of story that we want to tell. Hence, in 2007, they devised the Pakoupanga, which was the new haka now. So almost like every time now when the All Black team pitches up, like, which one are they going to do? So the opposition facing them, they're not sure which it is. Both are frightening. So I don't know how they decide on which one they does. I think, but it's just interesting that even such an entrenched ritual was reinvented.
Also, if you just look at the factor of valuing diversity, the reality is, like you said, they went to traditional Maori chiefs. That they included people into the development of the haka, and that talks to nation building as well. So it's about bringing people together. I mean, it's no secret that Maori players make up a big component of New Zealand rugby. So how do we include, and again compare that to where we are in Springbok rugby and the work that has to be done from a transformation perspective. So again, there's another great story there about how they have embraced diversity and they've made it probably a competitive advantage.
And also used the ancestors and the whole idea of legacy,
Absolutely.
which is key.
Absolutely.
Well, it clearly reminds everybody where we come from and what we stand for and the values and everything. But I'm sitting here wondering, so what's the corporate equivalent? What's the haka in a corporate? What are the rituals we should have in a corporate that in some way tell us who we are and where we come from? Is that our values on the wall? What is it?
So look, I think that's a great question. Do we propose that teams have their own version of a haka and do a haka? You might get some teams out there that would be for it. I can't think of many. But I think another way to look at that, and I think of force field analysis, I always think of that. It's not so much doing something else, but looking at what you do. So what rituals, because every team, every organization, the moment you put a group of people together, over a period of time, rituals start to develop. It's inevitable. So maybe it's also a question of looking at what rituals we have that are actually holding us back and do away with some before we worry about creating new rituals. One of my favorite studies that was done a while ago around communication was that was a study of how project teams communicate over a period of time, and lo and behold, they only start really communicating with each other towards the end of the project when all hell's breaking loose. And so the organization in question, all they did was they implemented a ritual where at 10 o'clock every day everybody has a coffee. The only rule is that everybody has to have it together. And they then carried on looking at how people communicated, and it changed the game for them. Suddenly people were communicating far more openly. Right. So sometimes it's not necessarily crazy, ridiculous, out there rituals. Sometimes it's doing away with the rituals that hold us back and implementing very small rituals that have that intention of resetting us, helping us refocus, bringing us together. I think there's loads of examples, creative examples even there.
So we've come, similarly to your communication research, all hell's breaking loose at the end of the podcast. But maybe just for you each to end with, what is your standout quality or attribute of the All Blacks that really, drives your life or work balance?
So I think to me there's two things. I think from a practice perspective, the importance character plays when bringing someone into a team. It carries a lot of weighting when wanting to play for the All Blacks. You need to be of a certain character, and I very often don't see that being applied in organizations. I think it's mainly lip service. But how much time are we giving to understanding the alignment between personal values and organizational values when we bring someone in? So that's the one thing. I think the second thing is just the elite mindset. It's the expectation of winning, and almost like being dumbfounded when you've lost. Like, how did this happen, guys? We don't lose. So it's that elite mindset, really always expecting the best, and I think doing so in humility, treating each other with dignity and respect, respecting each other, respecting the opponents. But as Ian has said, I'm going to respect you, but if you're on the ground, I'm still going to kick you and put another 50 points on you, which comes back to the elite mindset and trusting in the process, not focusing on the outcome.
Great, Janko. And for you, Ian?
Yeah, I think for me, I think what I'm most inspired about the All Blacks is around authenticity and community. I think, I think there's a big drive to be authentic, true to themselves, and I feel that inspires me to want to be a part of teams that are authentic. So there's genuine, open, honest communication. It's so rare in this world. So rare to be part of a team or a group of people where you get that sense of, wow, this is really, outside of your family, that's what you should be striving for. And I think that has translated into what I believe the All Blacks have really become, not just a great rugby team, but a great community. They're not just an organisation. I think that the better word to use for them is community, because it's not just an organisation with this boundary around them. It's a whole community, and one only has to look at when John Olympians passed away. I think how that community came together to celebrate his life. It was moving, and beyond that, it was authentic. And I think that is really a key takeaway for me is, what would happen if more organizations operated as safe communities where people can thrive, as opposed to organizations just targeting objectives. I think that's really the key takeaway for me.
Thank you so much, and maybe you'll give us the name of the fascinating podcast so we can share it in the show notes.
Yes, it was a TED Talk. I'll send the link. You can share it to the listeners. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Janko and Ian. It's been fascinating listening to your stories and your metaphors. Any last comments from you, Hilton?
I just think it's really informative to kind of hear how the brilliant chemistry of taking people who are passionate about something, find meaning in it, are authentic, they do it with humility. When you put all those things together, the result is obviously just so empowering in what it does. So it's been fascinating to hear from you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Of the lessons discussed today, the one that resonates the most with me is about embracing expectations. Our small team at Omnicor really do deliver on expectations, and the pressure has fine-tuned both our culture and products. There is no doubt we want to win. Check out our leadership development program and coaching offering on our website, because the very kind of content you've heard in this podcast is what you will find in our programs. If you like this episode, please subscribe and comment. Check out our website, www.omnicor.co.za, for our blog and previous episodes. You can find all our podcasts on iTunes, Libsyn, or our website, and any Android app. Big thank you to William Irwin, our producer.